Hi, I'm Milena. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to this massive reading adventure. This is going to be a reading vlog. I'm going to do full spoilers because I don't know how else I'm going to be talking about this book. Spoiler warning for the book that is called War and Peace by Lev Tolstoy. Let's start with expectations and the big why. Why am I doing this? Well, I think I'm now at a point in my classics journey that I'm going to read books that I didn't really think I would read. Now about 4 years ago that I started actively searching out classic literature instead of reading mainly contemporary literary fiction, which was really what I only read before this. I read all the books that I really wanted to read, that I saw everyone read, like, you know, the big classics. I read a lot of Brontë, George Eliot, I read Middlemarch, I read Anna Karenina, and now I'm kind of looking for books that maybe I haven't heard of before, or I'm looking for books that I didn't really think had a high priority. So when Rosin asked me if I wanted to join her book club and we would read a big classics together, I said yes, that sounds fun. She had a few options. I think most of them I had already read. One of her options was Middlemarch, which would have been great for her book club, of course, but I already read that one. So I said, from the options you were giving me, I would like to read War and Peace. And Charlotte said the same. I decided to make a vlog out of it because a lot of you seem to be curious about my thoughts on War and Peace, so I hope that you enjoy this. But I also wanted to do it for myself. I just don't know what to expect from this book, and I think I would really like to have a document of this. Is going to be the biggest classic I've ever read, so thank you for sitting here and going on this journey with me. My planning is as follows. I have made a War and Peace meter, so we together are going to see how fast I'm getting through this. I have 2 months for this, and that is the month of March and April of 2023. Today is the 4th of March and I'm already 1 day behind, which is fine. Not really, because that means I'm going to have to stress at the end of April. My planning is as follows: to listen to around an hour of the audiobook every day, and that means that I'm going to read volume 1 in March and volume 2 in April. And I was doubting between the translations because I got a lot of different advice from you all. There are these 2 translations, the modern one and the one that was approved by Tolstoy, which is a bit older, and like 50% of the people said read the older one and the other 50% told me to read more modern one. I'm going for the older one purely because that is the only one I can find an unabridged audiobook for. So this is the Moth translation, and the audiobook I'm listening to is narrated by Neville Jason. He is a fine narrator. I find him a little bit too British maybe for a Russian book, but that is just a personal preference. I think he gives a lot of characters an overly British voice, which I would have preferred a more neutral voice. But finding an unabridged audiobook of War and Peace is not easy, so I'm just going to go with this one. So since it's the 4th of March, I have listened up to chapter 15, which is this far in the War and Peace meter, which is not far at all. So far I don't really have much to say. I think the language is quite easy. It is not that hard to understand what is going on. There are a lot of characters, and some characters I kind of know by name by having heard other people talk about War and Peace. I know that we start out during the Napoleon Wars and people have different opinions on that. We have this younger man who definitely has a bit of naive opinions according to the older generation. So my expectations are that differences between generations are going to be a thing. And of course the title of the book is War and Peace, so I'm sure that the Napoleon Wars are going to play a bigger part in the rest of the novel. I feel like I need to get to know the characters better to be able to say something about them, to have an opinion on them. For now I'm just experiencing, vibing with the Russian setting of the early 19th century. That is all for now. Let's see how I feel about War and Peace in a few days. So I have finished book 1 of War and Peace. I did order a physical copy of the right translation that I'm also listening to. I don't really have any strong feelings on this book so far. Yes, I can see that it is by Tolstoy. I recognize his writing, but I'm not captivated by the characters in a way that I was when I read Anna Karenina at all. It is an easy read. It is easy to follow the dialogue. There are some interesting conversations. I think the last conversation I read was quite interesting about Andrei and his father, talking about him going to war and what would happen to his wife. So far the men are just really annoying. Like him telling his father, if it's a boy because his wife is pregnant, I want you to raise him. So without talking to his wife about that, and there are like multiple instances where women are portrayed as having limited emotions or limited experiences of what life is compared to men. We had some letters between Andrei's wife and sister, and their conversations are very surface level, which is understandable because they don't know each other very well. It is also portrayed as them not having the same range of intellect as the men do. I do like the war part and the discussion of the whole Napoleonic War. I think that's going to be more interesting, and I think I'm going to like the part where the men come back from the war more, because then we have seen some character development. This is still very much, I think, a setup of the book. Makes sense, book one, not that impressed. I don't really have the feelings of, yes, this is that great novel everyone talks about. That's not happening yet. I'm like okay reading it. I'm just not that impressed. This feels very 3-star to me so far, which feels a bit strange to say about a classic that so many people love. I'm so early into the novel. I'm sure a whole lot of things are to come. Hi, I decided to buy this paperback edition of a translation that I'm also listening to. So this says the definite translation newly revised, and that is the Mold translation. I am bored. But first of all, I am confused because the audiobook keeps saying like book 1, book 2, book 3, but this book says part. I've listened to a little over 200 pages. I am very intimidated because I'm only so far, and like I said, I am quite bored. I like the beginning where we had all of the characters and I felt like, oh, we are setting something up. We're getting to know different characters. And then this whole bit was just about a military setting and basically nothing happened. Am I slightly dumb for reading a book called War and Peace when I couldn't care less about military descriptions? Possibly. But still, if this is one of the greatest books ever written, I still want to read it. So clearly I did not enjoy that, mainly because I didn't feel like we got to know any character, and I also didn't really feel like it was building a setting for the book very well. I do think, but this is my personal interpretation, I don't know if Tolstoy meant to do this, but it kind of feels like we did get to explore the differences in rank and how that doesn't coincide with the differences in capability. I think we've seen a lot of people who rank quite high who are not at all capable, and we see people who rank lower who seem much more familiar with the grittiness of war, with the disgustingness of war. There was this one man who really admired his superior even though he was much better at being at war, and I think like in the next page he was killed. I think that is what I started to appreciate, and I think at the end, I'm going to name it as the book says, I think at the end of part 2, so book 1 part 2, we did get a lot of military action, and now that we are in part 3, I think we're going back to a peace bit. Right now my interest may be starting. I have to say, Andrei, like honestly, just disappear. I do not care about you. You are such a boring man. And telling your father that you want your child to be raised by him instead of his wife, basically telling your father, please, if it's a son, steal him from his mother. Like honestly, flush him down the toilet. That is horrible. I have no patience for that, and I'm sure I'm going to meet a lot of horrible men. I had some sprints with Julia from Shakespeare and such. She loves this book and she did say that he has a good character arc. It better be sped up, or he better be like not in this book too much, because I am not having it with that man. A lot of people have said that I will probably really enjoy Natasha, so I hope we're getting some of her in part 3. I was intrigued for 50 pages, bored for 150 pages. Let's get another intriguing 50 pages. That'd be awesome. It is today the 16th of March, so it's safe to say that I'm incredibly behind on my schedule. But it's fine, it's fine, it's absolutely fine. I am not worried whatsoever. It's fine, it's fine, it's fine. I am again in a war part. I am on book 1, part 3, chapter 19. And I remember saying in the last update that I found it like harsh to say that I want characters to die, but that Andre, as far as I could tell, could die. And now chapter 19 starts with: on the Pretsen Heights, where he had fallen with the flagstaff in his hand, lay Prince Andrei Bolkonsky, bleeding profusely and unconsciously, uttering a gentle, piteous and childlike moan. Now I feel mean. I know he won't die. No, well, you won't die. I mean, but I feel mean for saying that. I've been listening to the Great Comet of 1912, like their songs, to the prologue in which they introduce all the characters, and they say constantly, Andre isn't here. And every time they sing that, I'm like, if only. Great news. I am starting to enjoy this baby. I am on page 402. So yes, I'm still very behind. I've been reading quite a lot physically the last couple of days, and I think that has helped me getting connected to the characters. I have a feel of them now. I know who they are, I know their characteristics. There is this principal character page in which I have just marked the characters that I feel like are most important, and it's really helpful to see the different families and who is related. And in my mind, everyone is just either married or a brother or a parent to Natasha or Pierre. And that has been very helpful. I also think we just got like the early stages of character development now. Somehow the first war part is incredibly boring and it just doesn't feel functional in the story. And that's wrong. It does have a function in the story because it helps with the realization that some characters are getting to, but it's like this big part of the book that for me could have been a chapter. Of course, I know this is a chunker of a book, so it makes sense, but I think I had a really hard time getting through that. I feel like I am getting where this book is going because it starts out with especially the men, the three men, Nikolai, Andrei and Pierre. They all have this realization and they get away from how they have been raised. My favorite part, I think it was with Andrei. I wrote at the end of chapter 19 on page 313, finally some character development. Andrei sees how unimportant things are after getting wounded. Yeah, I think he was the one who Napoleon found, and he suddenly didn't care at all that Napoleon was always the hero, was so close to him. All that he cared about was being close to his loved ones, and he suddenly noticed how unimportant status is, which, beautiful, that is what we needed from Andrei. And later, when his son gets sick, it's just the part that I read. That was really beautiful too, because we have his son getting sick. He is at a point where he doesn't want to go back to war, and his father is going back to war, but he isn't. Oh, I so hope that I'm getting the characters right, because Pierre, Andrei and Nikolai, they are so similar. I know that they're different, but in this stage of the book they feel so similar. But with his son, that is a horrible part as well, and again reminds me of bits of Anna Karenina. Those more emotional character moments. I think Anna Karenina was written after War and Peace. Yeah, Anna Karenina was published after War and Peace, and I think it makes sense because the things I'm liking most in War and Peace are things that are more things that remind me of Anna Karenina, so more character-based bits. And I know I will love Anna Karenina more than War and Peace, I can already tell. Which I really liked Anna Karenina, I gave it 4 stars. And then we have, a little bit later on, we have Nikolai, who has a similar realization as Andrei, but in a different setting. He just doesn't glorify the emperor as much, and he is not as impressed by the emperor as he thought he would be. And then the part with Pierre, I don't really have words. It's interesting, but you can just feel with this character that every choice he makes is going to be an absolute disaster, like 100 pages later. So he has come close to the Freemasons, and they are quite interesting. I would say they're like the upper male cult, because they have a lot of interesting ideas. I do think they are very religious in not a church-like way, but they have just the Freemasons are quite interesting, but they are misogynist, like oh dear. The male main characters are all very misogynist in this book, and it's quite annoying. So the Freemasons have this ritual, and he's becoming part of that ritual to become part of them. And then he has to name his vice, and he says women. I'm like, oh, like women are not your vice. The way you view women is your vice. Like, don't say that half the population is your vice. I think generally War and Peace falls in this trap of mother, wife, mistress, where the women have a function towards the men and they only are in the book in their relation to men. Of course, Natasha and Sonja, they are interesting, but they are first incredibly sexualized, and secondly, I know that we only get to know them because they are going to have a meaning to one of the male characters. The male characters are allowed to exist on their own. We have Nikolai, we have Pierre, we have André. They all exist in their own world, and the women all have a relation to the men, and that is the base of misogyny. I'm sure they will be beautifully written, but I'm predicting that they are going to exist within the relationship they have towards the man. I believe Natasha is going to fall in love with André, which, oh gosh, I hope that man, like André so far is the only one who has a character development that I think will go really well. Like, I have hope for that man. Pierre is, he's really fun to read about because he's such a dumb fuck. But oh, that man, his life is not going to go well if he's going to be this dumb the whole book. The way that he lets people use him, and he is so gullible. I think it's a very interesting concept to put him in between the Freemasons, because they are an interesting group, but they are also very strong-willed, and I think once you are part of that group, there's no getting out of it. We'll see what happens to Pierre. My overall reading experience right now is that I constantly want to get back to this. Every time I sit down with this book, I don't really want to put it away. My goal now is to finish volume 1, and I think I have about 6 hours left of the audiobook. I am on page 600 right now. I have a little over an hour left before I finish volume 1. I like the fact that I've gotten to know the characters better, which I'm trying to say positive things about this book. I kind of like that we get to know Natasha, which I don't feel any feelings about her right now. She is 16. She behaves like she is 16. I hope you get a little bit of a time jump and that she's like in her early 20s and she can have that true character development a little bit more. I do like that we get a lot of competence versus incompetence from the men, with especially relationship between fathers and daughters, fathers and sons. I think that is interesting and fun to read. Right now it feels like a 3-star for me, just enjoyment wise, but I am not disliking it to a degree that I want to DNF it, which is the best thing I can say about this book so far. I feel like I could start to feel way more positive about this book if it really grips me in volume 2. It is not a punishment to read, but it's also not a joy. I have very little to say about this book. I'm not regretting reading it. Okay, well, I'll see you when I finish volume 1. I'm exactly on page 777. So, it's going well, it's going well. I've been more into the last chapters that I read. I think I really enjoyed it when the war kind of exploded and we got so much more details of actual consequences of the war, which I was kind of missing, where it was a lot of tragedy, and I think this definitely had a little bit more excitement to it. And I also like the chapters where it's more like Napoleon versus the Russians and we get to know different perspectives of the war, and I really like it as well that it was about 2 drawing rooms, like from Anna Mikhailivna, I think is her name, and that one is anti-French and the other is pro-French, like Helen is I think pro-French, and I think that kind of plays in with the fact that she and Anatole, her brother, are supposed to be the villains of this novel, and so are the French, so is Napoleon. I was doing sprints together with Rosen and Charlotte, and we were talking about how this book portrays Napoleon, and I had this whole bit where Napoleon's appearance is described in such an ungenerous way. I love to read these kind of things, to be honest. It says, he wore a blue uniform opening in front over a white waistcoat, so long that it covered his rotund stomach, white leather breeches tightly fitting the fat thighs of his short legs, and hessian boots. His short hair had evidently just been brushed, but one lock hung down in the middle of his broad forehead. His lump white neck stood out sharply above the black color of his uniform. And I think a lot of times it is discussed that he is so short, but Royton said that he was actually not that short. He was 173 centimeters, which is like an average height nowadays even, so his height was quite average, and I think that's kind of fun that he went into history with such prejudice. I mean he was a terrible person. I think he was a big ass dictator, but he was not that short, and I think it's fun how Tolstoy starts to play in volume 2 a little bit more with good and evil. I also like that it wasn't in the first part where we, especially the male characters we try to get to know, they had their like first seeds of development and they were neither good nor bad. I think the women are terribly written in this book in the sense that they have no true development. I mean, Natasha, I think is an interesting character to read about. I like it when she comes on the page. When it comes to it, her only characteristic is the fact that everyone is in love with her, which is super annoying, of course, and I'm predicting that Helene is going to die and Pierre is going to marry Natasha. That's going to happen, right? The evil first wife always has to die so that the man can marry the innocent girl that he is in love with. I am not happy about the way women are written in this book. I'm hosting some reading sprints tonight, so hopefully I can get through maybe today's and tomorrow's pages. That would be nice, so tomorrow I can just focus on some other reads. It's happening, guys. I'm finishing War and Peace sometime in the near future. Two characters met who I didn't think would meet with how the plot was going, and it was by accident as well. I like that. A lot of things is happening up, which I think is going to add some juice in the mix, and boy do I need it. War and Peace. So I'm nearly at page 800 already. I was underestimating myself, so I'll really be doing some reading tonight, which is really great. I almost fell asleep because I had a strategy chapter, and if you've read War and Peace, then you know. If you haven't, it is the kind of chapter where we just get this military strategy of the Napoleonic War, and it's, to me, who doesn't really like military history, quite a pill, so I just let the audiobook do their thing and wait for the next chapter, so I kind of know what is going on, what's happening. I am on page 833, and even though I had some more war chapters, two main characters were the biggest part of those chapters, and they had an interesting reunion, so that was more interesting. I think I'm understanding now that when the main characters are not part of those war chapters, that is where it kind of loses me. Tonight I will read up to like 850, which is a few more chapters. Okay, I am done with War and Peace for tonight because it ended on... I cannot say. I cannot say without spoiling it, but I feel motivated to pick it back up tomorrow. I feel like I'm always wearing my I'm not doing anything today jumper when I talk about War and Peace. But I am so far in and still I have about 300 pages, 350 pages left. So I'm on page 984, which I don't know what chapter that is. Look how far I'm in. I'm so proud of myself. I feel like my opinion is switching throughout reading the novel. Every time I start liking it more, I get to a part that I am not enjoying so much, and it never goes beyond that 3-star feeling for me. I can see how this is a bit of a me thing and how other people may enjoy it, but also I have to say, I don't think this is as good as people say it is. I am not feeling it. I think there are a lot of holes in this story and what you want from a well-written piece of writing, especially something that has characters that you follow for a really long time. I think these characters lack a lot of depth, the women more so than the men. This doesn't tip at all to Anna Karenina, which I think is a much superior novel or much superior book in my opinion. But something that I do recognize, I think it is kind of Tolstoy's way of writing. I also think it is telling for the time in which it was written. That is how you look at actions and consequences, what kind of influence that has on the characters, and there are a lot of metaphors within that. I think one of the clearest metaphors that Anatole, he is a clear villain. He is very oblivious to the consequences of his actions, which I think is a literal discussion that is had when he meets Natasha, that he is the kind of man who just doesn't think about what he does. And I just got to the part where we find out that he has lost a leg in the war, which I think is such a clear metaphor for his impulsiveness. He is being punished for his bad actions. But the funny thing to me, and I think to a general modern reader, is that we don't really agree with Tolstoy when it comes to every character. Clearly, Anatole is very easy to dislike. Any rake that just uses people for his own pleasure will always be unlikable, even though he is charming to read about. I can agree with Tolstoy that he is not a good man. But then we come to some different characters. The marriage between Pierre and Hélène is very interesting in my opinion, because it's very clear that Tolstoy sees Pierre as this pure and honest man. He is naive in the beginning of the book and he has a lot to learn, and Hélène is his downfall. It is a result of mistakes he made when he was younger. That is, I think, how Tolstoy writes this book. But I do not agree from my perspective, and I think Hélène is badly written. You can distill something from her as a modern reader that I don't think Tolstoy meant to write, and that is that she is the only character who doesn't let her life be determined by male oppression. So we have these women who are supposed to be very likable. We have Natasha, we have Sonia, Marya, in a way, kind of, but all of them make decisions based on the men in their lives, and they all suffer in some way or another from male oppression. We have Natasha, who suffers in that way because she is objectified from a very young age by all of these men who fall in love and who make a version of her in their heads and fall in love with that. No one falls in love with her because she doesn't really exist. She has no personality, which I think is most telling in the very explosive moment where Anatole does what he does and she is kind of grieving for her mistake, but she is grieving like a child, and that is, I think, the moment where we are reminded how old she actually is. And I find it quite inappropriate how all these men are behaving around them and how it's written as well, because it's incredibly romanticized to fall in love with such a young girl when she is not really a person yet. And I don't say that people that age aren't really a person yet, but Natasha definitely is not. Because I think she has been exposed to so little. And then we have Sonia, who is basically just waiting for Nikolai. She's the kind of character who will forgive him for everything he does. I think eventually he will not marry her, but he will marry Marya, I think, because of the financial things. And then we have Marya, of course, who is basically existing for the three men in her life: her father, her nephew, and her brother. All her reasoning is based on the kind of obligation she feels towards them. But then we have Hélène, who we are supposed to dislike. And it's very easy to dislike her because she cheats on her husband like right away. She goes after her own satisfaction. But that is what all the men are constantly doing as well, especially Pierre. He is just looking for a way to satisfy his needs. So he and his wife are basically doing the same thing, but why is he the hero and she the villain? Because sure, she is having an affair, but excuse me, he is in love with a teenage girl. Yes, I would also want to divorce Pierre if I was his wife and he was in love with a teenage girl. Yet Hélène is not a nice, lovely woman. She is not a feminist or anything like that. But she is the only one who takes control of her life without considering her obligation towards the men in her life. And I think Tolstoy uses that to villainize her, which is one of the most misogynistic ways to villainize a woman. So I'm not dwelling with Tolstoy's writing of women at all. I found it questionable at times in Anna Karenina, but I did appreciate how he was able to look at the psychology of those women, and I think he looked more at women as people than as objects, which is really happening in this book. You have women, war, money, and then the characters are just the men. and women are just the decorations around them, just as war. And that is really super annoying. And I don't know what will happen in the last 300 pages, but I highly doubt it will change. I find André, he is not a nice character. I've said this before, but I really like reading about him because I think he is the most layered character in this book. I think Pierre is somehow developed in his characteristics, but he is very much Tolstoy's toy in the way that he is his voice for his philosophies and his thoughts, and I'm just not really interested in Tolstoy on that level. I find him an interesting writer, and I think he was, this is no news, he was a very talented writer, but I'm not really interested in his philosophies because I do not find him interesting in that way. I had the same issues with Levin in Anna Karenina. I know most people disagree with me, no interest for me in that part, especially because there's such a heavy romanticization in everything they do wrong. Pierre threatens to murder his wife. He's in love with a teenage girl. He's not it, you guys. I'm not saying that because of his flaws. I'm saying that because of the lack of recognition that they are flaws. I am more interested in the last war part I read, where I think the Napoleonic War just kind of exploded and we really got to see a lot of the working class people and the effect it had on them, and I found it way more interesting than the strategy part. So yeah, I like the war part, which is good, and now I'm just gonna read the rest because I am curious of what is going to happen with all the characters. But I still have the issues. I don't really see them as people, but just as parts of a chess play, which is not something I enjoy reading in books. Yes, that's it for now. A lot of rambles. It's a lot of a feminist perspective on War and Peace. I do realize that throughout all of these updates, but I guess that's just what you get from me reading a classic like this. I have reached the 1000-page mark of War and Peace, which is great. I feel accomplished, but I have now taken a break of a few days. It was kind of needed, and I have very little desire to get back to it, so I'm trying to just read some other things, watch a lot of TV, and hopefully feel some motivation before the live show to finish the last 300 pages. I did see a lot of people talk about the epilogue really sucks, so we'll see how I feel about that. Something I am liking is that I'm not really liking that Pierre is in prison, but I think it is really well written. I think it was necessary for Pierre to be put in an environment where he's not able to make his own choices as much as he was before, because I think he is the kind of character where he is not really guided by anyone, he is not really helped, and I think he has been gotten too much responsibility for the lack of guidance that he has had. So I think this complete new environment of a prison where he has lost his freedom, but he discovers that he can still kind of decide how to act towards other people, I think is an important part of his character development. André dying, I did not think that would happen, if I am quite honest, and I heard people say that Natasha's character development towards the end isn't great. I still am not convinced of her love for him because they just barely know each other. And I'm not saying that I don't believe in love at first sight, but there's a difference between falling in love and deeply loving someone, and I feel like right now Natasha's love is portrayed as deeply loving someone, while I think what she is in love. I'm finding that quite unconvincing. Maria, on the other hand, I am finding increasingly interesting. I think we're seeing a bit of a shift with her. Don't really know what's going to happen with the war pieces, but I'm just going to read the last 300 pages and I will get back to you when I'm going to read the epilogue and we can suffer together. So I thought we could read the epilogue together, but the epilogue is 100 pages. And people tell me that the epilogue is one of the most boring parts that they had to push through, and those were people who actually liked the book. So I'm just delaying it because I'm not in the mood to be able to be in a worse mood. I'm never reading Tolstoy again. Like, I am done. Today is the day. Today is the day I'm going to finish War and Peace. It's currently 8:30 and I have read the first epilogue. I have been very negative on Instagram, but I think that's mainly because I'm just throwing some feminist frustration out there on Instagram stories. I'm not disliking it that much, okay? I don't know how negative these updates have been, but I'm not hating it that much. It's just every time I start enjoying this, Tolstoy just throws some extremely sexist phrase into the mix and I'm just like, I need a minute. Why would you do this? Why would you tell me that a good woman doesn't respond in a conversation but just absorbs everything the man says? And why would you say that a certain woman is more beautiful when she cries? Like, just don't. And the way that Tasha is written in the first epilogue, the way that Maria, I think it was Maria, she was like, all this wild girl needed was a husband and children and now she is fine. Oh, barf. It's so bad. But then, I have to say, I've kind of flew through the first epilogue. I didn't mind it. I know that the second one is the one that people don't like, so it's fine. I'm gonna read that when I finish this update. But I have to say, I really like the marriage between Nicola and Maria. I was kind of rooting for that happening because I felt like they could be a good match, and I think that is the way they are being written in the first epilogue, that they really complement each other in marriage, not just because of the financial situation, the fact that, you know, Maria is very lonely and Nicola introduces her into a bigger family. Maria helps him calm down and just think more about his morals and his violence, which I think they complement each other in that way. But I also just think their characters match really well. Much better than Pierre and Natasha, because oh, that marriage is bad. That is one toxic marriage. Wow, it's so fun to read about. It's really fun. Oh wow, the jealousy, the codependency, just wow. Divorce was legalized for a reason. But I think that messiness is very, very fun to read about. So I had a great time reading about these marriages in the first epilogue, and I also like the way that earlier in the first epilogue it was discussed how war is not something to be proud of, and how I think I understand what he was saying, but maybe I don't fully understand it. But what I kind of distilled out of it is that men are forced in these situations to behave in certain ways that are crimes against human nature, and that it is nothing to be proud of and nothing to envy. And I enjoyed that, but I think when Tolstoy talks about women, and especially the women's movement, when he was like, it wasn't yet really present. And also, I'm going to use a really vague metaphor with food and dinner to describe how a woman doesn't need her own rights when she is being provided with a family by a man. I'm just like, Tolstoy, shut up. Just shut up and give me like these fun, messy marriages. But don't tell me what women want and what they don't want. And I feel like Tolstoy has evolved after writing War and Peace. And he wrote Anna Karenina because he definitely has different views on those kind of topics in that novel, both women rights wise and when it comes to the serfs. The second epilogue is supposed to really piss you off, so let's do that. Okay, I'm currently live. Well, not live because I'm talking to you right now. I finished War and Peace last night. The second epilogue was horrific. I really did not enjoy it. I think I was kind of ranting about the first epilogue, but then the second epilogue is so much worse. There's nothing about the characters and just Tolstoy like explaining his agenda on war and peace. And I think if you read this for pleasure, then the second epilogue is so boring. Yeah, that's all I have to say about it. There were parts where I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting about what it is to be an historian, and there were some interesting parts, but then he used metaphor after metaphor to explain a certain point that I thought could have been explained in just a very simple way, and it was incredibly tiring. It made me really sleepy, but I was proud. I did a little dance with the cats when I finished this. But overall, having finished War and Peace, I'm going to give it 3 stars. Like, some parts I did really like. I didn't like hate it, so it's not going to be a 2 stars. I guess if you get things out of it that I just didn't, then I understand why so many people love it. I got into the book quite skeptical, so I understand why it's not really for me. I don't know what else to say about this book. It wasn't worth all those pages for me. I'm glad I read it and I'm proud of myself, but I'm also disappointed that I read such a big book and that I didn't get like anything out of it. Like even in the last bit I was like, when is this going to start? It just never felt like powerful and purposeful to me. I always felt like I was floating a little bit on the surface with this book and I just didn't hook me in any way. And I did enjoy, I think especially like in the middle, I started to really enjoy the characters and the more plotty bits. That could have been like a 300-400 page book. Looking at it from a feminist point of view, this was an absolute nightmare. I mean, I didn't expect much from Tolstoy in that perspective. It could have been less bad. Pushing the way he thinks about life and the way he talks about class and serfs as well is quite despicable. Tolstoy, the narrator, the characters, you know, Tolstoy is very clearly pushing an agenda in his books. I think he says, I tried to read the appendices but like gave up after the first page, but he very clearly says that it is not a novel, and sure, whatever, dude. If you don't want to call it a novel, it's not a novel. But he, in his works, also in Anna Karenina, he is clearly pushing some of his own views. And you have Levin in Anna Karenina and you have Pierre in this book who really does that. And it's not nice. I didn't love it. So, I don't really know how else to wrap this up other than to say that if you've watched this whole thing and haven't read War and Peace, if you are just curious, don't let me or this vlog discourage you from reading War and Peace, because I know most people really love and enjoy this book. So I'm very excited to now start reading things that I will enjoy way more. But thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for watching this vlog. I hope you have a lovely day or evening, and I hope to see you in another video. Doei!